So this is a fireside chat according to our program. Would you like to briefly introduce yourselves and briefly introduce the topic, because I'm not sure I can decipher the title.
Who shall go first? I suggested Lubo goes first.
You go.
Yes. No, okay, well, what I can say is that both me and Yavor, we are political scientists, and our contribution to this conversation would be to give some sort of overview of the implications for digitalization for the region, and in my particular case also with regards to the national security implications. The title would be something like challenges to Balkan digitalization, political and economic challenges to Balkan digitalization, something like this. So should we just proceed further with the conversation? I'm not sure how exactly we are doing it, but
yes, but because it's not a presentation, I will let Yavor introduce himself briefly.
Okay.
Well, I too am a political scientist like Lubomir. I suppose my part of this discussion would focus on the geopolitical context to an extent, but to a greater extent, I suppose, on the local implications, on the implications for the Western Balkans, and for those countries that used to be in the taxonomy of international relations, that used to be Balkan countries like Bulgaria and Romania, never admitted to it, but used to be Balkan countries, and are now considered part of the larger West in their capacity as European Union members. So I suppose we will both, to an extent, provide context, international context, but Lubomir will probably focus more, as he said, on the national security implications, and I will probably put an emphasis on the local Balkan context, which are not mutually exclusive things, by the way. So I suppose it will be a free-flowing conversation, and these are just flags that we put up to sort of to delineate the broader topic. But I have to say one last thing before I give over the floor to Lubomir. I have to say that I really like Desislav's title, actually, Balkan digitalization or digital Balkanization, because it does encompass a lot of the problems that we here in the Balkans have, not just with the process of digitalization and becoming part of the greater world in terms of technology and economy and security, but also of the way we relate to one another here in the Balkans, which is of a foremost importance to all of us, I think. So seeing that he didn't really introduce himself, I won't say too much about myself. Whoever is interested in learning about me can always ask us at the end of the discussion. I suppose we can begin.
Yeah, sure. Let's just get right into the discussion. So let me first start with a few words about why the digitalization of the region is important. And the digitalization or the digital transformation as well are some of the trends that we'll hear a lot about in the future as well, because they're shaping the business models, they're shaping the production processes, they're shaping the everyday life, if you'd like, with the introduction of the Internet of Things. And even though it sounds a little bit vague, because just like many of the new terms, digitalization sounds a little bit like a buzzword. It has a lot that it is packed in itself. And so according to a recent report by McKinsey, digitalization of a much broader area than the Balkans, the Central and Eastern Europe, because the McKinsey report focuses on a broader area, predicts that by 2025, a successful further digitalization of the economies would bring nearly about 200 billion euros towards the country's GDP. This is an enormous amount of money that would help the future economic development of these countries. And since the market economy a few decades ago, the Eastern European countries, and in that case also a large portion of the Balkan countries, have made an enormous economic progress with extraordinary GDP growth, an average of 30 to 50% of their initial starts. However, as the economic basis for their growth wanes away, and they have reached some maturity, this economic growth slows down. So, as I said, some of the new trends are that the successful digitalization of the economy would be the new boost, the new wave towards economic growth. Furthermore, the countries in the Balkan region would be rather well placed for this kind of digitalization trend. So if we look at the 6 countries in the Western Balkans, for example, and the other Balkan countries, including members of the European Union, Bulgaria, Romania. In this case, I also, Croatia, I also would include even Greece. I took the time to look into the program for international student assessments at the OECD and look at their scores to see how they're doing in terms of math and science literacy scores. And it turns out that they're quite well placed, so which means that the educational foundations for future digitalization are there. In addition, we have lack of this what would you call the legacy industries, if you like, which are low, technologically low intense and low requiring low digitalization, which means that the region is not tied to prior industries that can very difficultly change and develop towards digitalized future. So I would also outline, however, here some of the challenges to the regional digitalization, because there are many challenges, and probably the biggest one is the severe undercapitalization of the regional markets for digital solutions. This is due to many reasons, but one that would probably stick out is the inadequate understanding of the regional national governments for the importance of the advanced digitalization. This is not quite in the priorities of these governments, and the creation and fostering of high-tech ecosystems is not yet understood as the important trend for the future of economic development. As a consequence, we also see quite inadequate amount of attention for funding by the governments, inefficient level of popularization of the what digitalization means actually, and how it would benefit the businesses. And also this leads to a greater level of ignorance and lack of understanding of the general public what the digitalization means and why it is important as a trend. Furthermore, much of the traditional, I said that it is good that the traditional industries in the region are not relying on technology, and in that sense, they're not vulnerable to automation and artificial intelligence. However, this also means that they're not quite prone for easy transition to digitalized future. And also there is a very severe brain drain from the region that's been going on for the past few decades, which also would impact the ability for digitalization. And these are just some of the general challenges. Now, in addition to this, I would outline three more, maybe four more specific challenges to the digitalization of the region. For at least some of the points, my colleague Javor will speak. And the first one would be perhaps the level of regional integration, what even the title of this conference suggests, digital balkanization. The word balkanization, of course, here used in the sense of fragmentation, and the sheer knowledge of the other, how much we know about each other here on the Balkans, including what's the level of professional development, what are the available resources, and so on and so forth. I think this level is very low, and this is a significant challenge to the future digitalization. The second challenge, which I think it is no less important, is the fact that today we are witnessing the proliferation of disruptive behavior by rogue actors, and backed very oftenly by rogue states. So we see these growing fault lines that are reminiscent of the Cold War. One can imagine here the hackers from North Korea, China, Russian affiliated groups, other Eastern European affiliated groups, where the disruption of markets and through cyber attacks is something that unveils potential dangers for the region-wide digitalization of the systems, especially those that are perhaps controlling and could control more vital aspects of the local, national, and regional economies. So, for example, you can even think of the latest, even though there is no shortage of examples, but the latest example that comes here from my own part of the world is the current ransomware hacker attack on the Colonial pipeline that happened over the weekend, allegedly originating from some obscure parts of what it turns out to be Eastern Europe. So in general, cyber attacks on industries just for the past year, for 2020, have caused damages of nearly $125 billion. And many of those attacks are state-sponsored or state-supported, with connections between those hackers and rogue states. A recent study by Semantic, for example, revealed that some of the largest groups of hackers that are disrupting those processes are linked to governments in China, in Russia, Iran, North Korea, once again, and they have been responsible for numerous attacks on the European Union and the United States in particular. And finally, the last serious challenge to successful digitalization of the region is coming from the fact itself that digitalization is not a straightforward process. First, because here we're talking about a number of industries, from healthcare to education, from agriculture to farming, to commuter administration and transportation and coordination, from digital services, in insurances, in sales, in trade, and so on, to things like process integration, manufacturing, productivity tools, and system management, from business modeling and operation to consumer relationship management, digital advertising, retail, logistics, and so forth and so on. You can see that digitalization could be a very widespread process that covers many industries and areas of the economy, which means that building compatible infrastructures and communication channels would be one of the main challenges, the synchronization between the different agents that would be responsible for this trend of integration. Furthermore, what we need is a sort of starting, fostering, funding, supporting digital projects and initiatives that are of the region, from the region, not just taking place merely in the region. That would be the only possible, if you like, step for greater integration on a regional level. Here I would also outline the necessity for establishing clusters of cooperation between certain technologies and projects with a clear view on the ability for greater cooperation on Balkan regional level, exchange of knowledge and technology, synchronization of policies and regulation and administration of all digital related matters. How exactly policies will be synchronized and regulated, that would be an important element. Secondly, the regional digitalization will have to rely on, for good or for bad, on imported technologies for the creation of the necessary digital infrastructure that will drive the digitalization in the region. Some of these technologies have been available through local and regional developers, and it is important in that sense to invest and support innovation in the region and to incorporate as many as possible of these existing companies and technologies and the regional producers. However, some of the fundamental elements for the digitalization that would be required are not available from regional players and are available only from a handful of producers. So let's take example of 5G and the reliance on the building of high capacity communication networks. The 5G technologies are expected to support those interconnected and automated devices that will drive the trends in the future. Smart homes, self-driving vehicles, systems, integrated systems for services, and so on and so forth. The problem with 5G networks is that there are only really two countries and companies that are more or less connected to those countries that can build those 5G networks. One of them is China, and the other one is United States. And a big challenge would be who will build those 5G networks. Now, in approaching this issue, I think for me the only meaningful recommendation would be that this advice, or if you'd like, a proverb coming back from the time of the Trojan War, timeo Danaos, sed dona ferentes. Fear the Greeks even when they're bringing you gifts. And in that sense, the countries in the region will have to be very careful which site they choose, which technology they choose, because when it comes to 5G network, this could provide a serious challenge to the national security of the countries. The Chinese investments in the region, for example, have been stepped up ever since the past maybe 8-10 years. Chinese investments in the Western Balkans are extremely high, about $15 billion, of which nearly $11 billion are going to Serbia. But you also see what happens with countries like Montenegro, which is perhaps one of the latest victims of predatory practices of the Chinese investments, and they're calling now for bailout from the European Union. So you see the trap of those investments. Huawei is the largest company in the world right now, technological giant, with over 110,000 active patents. As recently as last September, they opened a development center in Belgrade.
Excuse me.
Let me just finish, which is just right after Serbia signed an agreement with Washington to keep away Chinese technological investments in the region. So you see, the Balkans are becoming the battleground for new geopolitical struggle, and in that sense, it will be very important for the countries in the region to try to stay away, or maybe to balance better the interests, their own interests, and the interests that are attached to their immediate future.
Yes, we only have 8 minutes now. This is why I would like to hear Javor. Maybe he has something to comment on what you just discussed, or maybe he has something to say of his own.
Both, actually. I both have comments, and I'd like to take up on certain leads provided by Lubomir, but also I'd like to begin this. I'll try and squeeze it into 8 minutes. To begin by telling you very briefly of 3 instances of issues of Balkan digitalization and the problems of Balkan digitalization that I find extremely pertinent to the topic of both this Fireside talk and the conference in general. Last January of 2020, in my capacity as editor-in-chief of a business magazine here in Bulgaria, I was invited to a series of events by the local government agency in charge of aiding small and medium businesses, with people involved in the digital transformation of the Western Balkans, and people, members of the various investment agencies of Macedonia, Serbia, Albania, and Bosnia. And a series of meetings with linchpins of the Bulgarian IT community here. There was a meeting with then EU Digital Czar Maria Gabriel, and a variety of other occasions. And what made a particularly strong impression on me during those meetings was the level of ignorance, mutual ignorance, between the two sides, the host side, if you will, and the various agencies and various representatives of the Western Balkan countries as regards the capacity of both in the area of digitalization. Remarkable ignorance, which cannot be explained by anything else other than bad traditions, lack of understanding of digitalization as a process that does not take hold all by itself, but requires sustained push, requires actual effort on the part of everyone involved. For example, our guests here in Bulgaria, especially the Macedonian and the Serbian guests, were very surprised to find that not only was Bulgaria a hub for IT technology, which is taken as a given in this country, but also that there are money to be invested in Bulgaria by private Bulgarian startup accelerators, including money that could be invested in other countries, including the Western Balkans. And they were very interested in that, and they wanted to examine the possibilities that Bulgarian investment, Bulgarian finance could go some way towards helping develop the Serbian digital ecosystem, the Serbian digital infrastructure, which is one problem of digital balkanization that we have to deal with around here. in the Balkans, the almost complete lack of knowledge of what neighboring countries seem to be doing in the broader field of digitalization. Now, at the same time, we have instances of investment by third parties in the Balkans. I could give you two examples. One is now a fairly old example of the Bulgarian Telerik company being acquired by the American Progress company for a quite substantial sum of money. But also yesterday's news, the news that a North Macedonian e-commerce startup company, Grouper, which was acquired by a Polish company called Payten, which specializes in payment industry solutions. Now, it would be very good if we had more news of this kind of, Balkan companies acquiring each other, pulling resources together, trying to find ways to overcome precisely the lack of fresh money, the lack of investment that Lubomir was talking about. That's one major issue facing the digitalization revolution, if you like, in the Balkans. Another issue, I think, is the relative weakness of the European Union, which I think has considerably slowed down or considerably cooled, I think, in its efforts to integrate the Western Balkans, regardless of what they say, regardless of the talk. I think the recent crisis that the European Union faced has considerably cooled enthusiasm for integration, and with it, I'm afraid, the understanding that digitalization can be helped greatly by the process of the integration of the Western Balkans. I think the Western Union needs to find, and that's from the security point of view, from the implications from security point of view, the European Union needs to find a new enthusiasm for integrating the Western Balkans, economically, politically, of course, first of all, but also economically and security-wise. Otherwise, instances like the one brought up by Lubomir about massive Chinese investments in the Balkans will not be the exception, but rather the rule. And another particularly pertinent point to be made here is that should the West wish to bring the Western Balkans into the fold in all manner of ways, political, economic, and security ways, the European Union, the United States, needs to invest in the Balkan digital infrastructure, needs to invest in all manner of ways in order to keep off contenders, because nature abhors a vacuum, and in the in the absence of interest on the part of one major player, another major player will always, as a rule, try and insert himself into the vacuum. No vacuum must be left to exist in the Balkans, so that no strategic competitors can insert themselves politically, economically, and technologically into the Balkans. That's, I think, a very important part of the conversation. Now, regarding the demographic decline, I was very surprised recently to read in The Economist that the pandemic and the various crises that have buffeted the European Union over the last 10 years have resulted in a slow drift of migrants back to their home countries. I think the number cited for Romania was 1.3 million returnees, mostly from Western Europe, of course, and the number cited for Bulgaria was 500,000 returnees. And in case of both countries, these are very substantial numbers of people returning to their home countries. I think there's a potential there, even if we consider that the vast majority of these returnees are not qualified workers, are not necessarily people who contribute directly to the process of digitalization, but only marginally, say, for example, as consumers. A small number of these people will be qualified people who will be able to contribute substantially to the process of digitalization. And I think this reverse migration is a process that needs to be paid special attention to, both by national governments and by the EU and by investors as well. That's something to be considered as well. Now, regarding how digitalization affects security, I think Lubomir has said enough. I think the major issue from the point of view of a country like Bulgaria is cybersecurity, security of its vital industries and vital communications. And I think that, which is largely a matter of, I think, decision-making on the part of the government, is largely a function of a lack of neglect. I think the Bulgarian government has been very slow in realizing its very ambitious program, ambitious in words but not in deed, for electronic government, for making a transition to an electronic government. And if this is the case in a European Union member state, I hate to think what the situation is in non-European Union member states like Serbia and North Macedonia and Albania and Bosnia. I'm afraid these are issues that also need to be looked at, because issues of cybersecurity, issues of interference with vital systems and communication lines within nation states, as well as between nation states in the Balkans, is a matter that is of critical immediate importance to the national security. Basically, Balkan digitalization has the potential to benefit both the countries in the region and the European Union at large. What will prevent digital balkanization in the Balkans will be the prevention of digital balkanization in the European Union and between the European Union and NATO, and between the European Union and the United States. I think the Balkans are in no way different, affected pretty much by the same processes as the countries of the European Union. And therefore, I think a new concerted push in terms of security, in terms of investment, in terms of, if you like, non-neglect, is of critical importance. I think I've run out of time. There are many more things I wanted to say, but I think I'll leave it at this, because I think I'm 3 or 4 minutes out of line. So I'm not sure how to proceed from here. I think Julian Bishop will know.
Thank you. We are right on time. Thank you both. And this concludes our module, I believe. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.